Good afternoon, welcome to Marty's Tying Bench. This afternoon I'm tying an Amy's Ant. This is a Jack Dennis design, an Umpqua pattern, and I've learned that the guides really like this one, so I thought I'd take a hint and start tying them. Now, this is a little more complicated than a lot of the flies that I demonstrated, but there's a load of good tricks in here that will make your foam flies better. I tied this one a little different. I'm going to use 140 denier thread, preferably a UTC or Danville's, a lot less likely to cut your foam. And I go ahead and get the hook shank covered with thread because we're going to make some use of super glue. One of the things that drives me nuts about foam flies is when they slide around and don't stay on the top of the hook. So let me show you a few ways to help that. Now I've got some regular old 2mm craft foam, and I'm just going to trim the edges off. And this thing's just a little bit less than the gap of the hook. Now if I were to simply tie this in, this thing's just going to slide around so easily, and if I tie tighter it'll just cut the foam and that tip will pop off. So what I'm going to do is just get a touch, truly just a touch of super glue. Now the trick becomes keeping it off my fingers. Get that in there right behind the eye, and then I'm going to push that foam down around the shank so I can hold it in place as I move the thread to the back, and then when I get to the back I'll make a little flat spot, and look what that did to the foam underneath. Pretty much encircled the hook, and it's rock solid. Now I'll trim this tail and give it a little bit of shape. And right on top of that we're going to tie some brown craft foam. Now this one's the full width of the gap, and there's a reason I like it a little bit bigger that'll show up when we install the rear legs. Now this one I'm going to cut a notch out of the back, so there's a little split tail. Another touch of super glue, and I'm going to lay this in so that it extends a little bit back past the foam tail. Before I do anything, I'm going to kind of press it down against that super glue and start cupping that foam. It's a good idea to give your thread just a little bit of spin to flatten it out and get it perpendicular across the foam. And then instead of pulling on the thread first, I'm going to squeeze that foam, then pull on the thread. And that'll sink that down in there. And I can get a nice firm tie-in with just a few turns. A couple of security wraps in front and then back into the groove for tails. Now this is rear tails is regular old round rubber, and what I've done was I've cut one piece that's the length of the tails that I like on this one. So now here I got a whole bunch of identical length tails. And to get them off, what I'm going to do is pinch it really hard and just kind of pluck at one end. Now it's real easy to just kind of reach up and peel one off at a time. Now if this is tied in above the foam, it's going to stand out pretty perpendicular. If you get it underneath the foam, those legs are going to droop towards the bottom. That's why I like a little wider foam on the brown, so that I can seat the legs against the sides of that and keep them perpendicular to the hook. You may see that a little bit better here on the far side. There we go. Now I'm going to make one turn in front of all the rubber legs, and that will help separate them a little bit, and then they'll separate some more when I pull the brown foam forward. Now for an underbody, we've got a fine ice chenille in an olive. And I want to tie that right back up against the foam. Let me shorten up this piece of foam. I got a long strip so I can tie several, but I don't need the whole thing for this. Now there's a hackle on the belly, and we're going to trim it so you can use any size hackle. If you have a surplus of small hackle like 18s, I would just use that and dispense with this trimming part. Now I'm not going to come forward all the way. I'm going to leave a space up here for the head. And this doesn't have to be particularly dense. Just get, it's 3 turns. That's all it took. That's not much. Then come through with the brown hackle. And I spread the turns out enough so that the green continues to show through. Don't get it too dense. Here's the pain in the arm part. Just going to trim all of this stuff short. All while trying not to cut the legs off. There we go. Got a bottle brush. Here I see a few strays. Now when I pull the brown foam over, I'm going to stretch it just a little bit. You'll see it tug those forward legs. No tension, just getting it straight across. Again, push on the foam and let your fingers do the compression instead of the thread. Now I'm going to lift it up and jump the foam forward till it's right behind the eye. And do it again. And now I can kind of crush that down. This is the base for my legs and flash. Now for flash, it calls for rainbow Krystal Flash. You don't need much. You just get 6, 8 strands. And I'm going to cut those so that they're just about the length of my foam pieces. Now I've stacked some deer hair. I think the original pattern calls for elk. And this isn't a terribly big bundle or a thick bundle. Measure that until it's just past the foam. Couple of loose wraps, and then just crush that in there. I don't want to build up too much here, and I'm not going to worry about making a bunch of wraps to get that neat because I'm going to cover it with dubbing. Now the dubbing it calls for is Arizona synthetic dubbing. Wonderful stuff. It's kind of slick, so it doesn't always dub as easily as some others. But a fuzzy looks okay here. And since we got that throat built up, it doesn't take very thick layer of dubbing. And that's it. Now when I fold the brown back, I'm not going to stretch it. I'm going to leave that somewhat relaxed. Now I'm going to have to pull kind of hard here, so I want to make sure my thread's flat. And get that perpendicular turn right across the top. And one more on top of it. Then kind of compress the foam and pull a little bit. Another couple of wraps and pull a little harder. There we go. Now I'm going to cut this into a point. Reach across from one side and then the other. Let's give you a little bit of shape there. And we're ready for the front legs. There I've made 2 wraps, but before I put the far legs in, I'm going to take one of them back. There we go. So where to whip finish? We're going to whip finish right here, and I'm going to get a little bit of super glue on about 1 inch and make quick turns and make sure that they seat before they get a chance to stick to the foam. And without too much delay, get your whip finisher. 2 turns is enough. We're sinking this into super glue. Now we're done, except for a final check. Shorten up that head if we like. Take a look at those legs. There's one that looks a little bit longer. Amy's aunt.